Today's class is going to center on performance appraisal, which is a key component of a performance management system. By the end of the lecture, we are expecting to cover some issues such as the definition of performance appraisal, the various, the purpose of performance appraisal, the various methods that can be adopted to the conduct of performance appraisal. And lastly, we will also look at some possible errors or biases which may mar the success of a performance appraisal process and how some of these errors can be overcome. So let's commence with the definition of performance appraisal. Performance is essentially an employee's contribution to organizational success. An employee's contribution to organizational success. And it is measured in two main respects. The outcome, which may be quantified or qualified, and the processes or the behavior leading to the outcome. So the outcome may be, let's assume I have a sachet water company. And when I say I am measuring the performance of my employees, it will mean that, one, I am interested in verifying the number of packs or number of bags that they are able to produce as far as the production of sachet water is concerned. That will be the output. I will also be interested in the behavior leading to this output, which can be linked to issues such as attendance, punctuality, communication, following laid down safety protocols, and so on and so forth. So performance is very much enormous anytime we attempt to measure it. What then is performance appraisal or performance evaluation? Performance appraisal is a systematic, periodic, and impartial rating of an employee's excellence in matters pertaining to their present job and their potential for better job in the future. I'm taking it again. Performance appraisal is the systematic, periodic, and impartial rating of an employee's excellence in matters pertaining to their current job, as well as their potential for a better job in the future. This means that when we are faced with an appraisal system, which is haphazard, not systematic, and also perhaps once in a blue moon, and for that matter, not periodic, and also based on the whims and caprices of the manager, or let's say your supervisor, then we are not dealing with a properly laid down performance appraisal system. So for a performance appraisal to be characterized as the right one, it has to be systematic. It has to also be rolled out periodically, which could be twice in a year. In some organizations, they even do it 3 times in a year, so that you can implement corrective measures before the year comes to an end. Then it also has to be impartial. So the ratings that you are going to get from your manager or your supervisor, and depending on the stakeholders that will be involved in the appraisal process, maybe your peers or customers, it has to be done in an impartial manner. So all their biases and subjectivity must be relegated to the background, and they have to be as objective as possible when they are giving you feedback on your performance. So that can be construed as performance appraisal. Put differently, performance appraisal is also the process of evaluating employees' performance of a job in terms of its requirements. And the requirements over here are the standards that have been set, which will be juxtaposed with the actual performance of the employee to verify whether there are some variations and also there are some deviations. Then it can also be defined as a step where the management finds out how effective it has been at hiring and placing of employees. So if management wants to ascertain whether the categories of employees that they have assigned some responsibilities to execute were contingent on good selection techniques, then the appraiser will help them to derive whether they took the right decision or not. So performance appraisal may also be a way that management will get feedback on a decision that they took when they were recruiting and selecting employees. Now, the purpose of performance appraisal. Why is it even necessary for managers or supervisors to be concerned about the performance of their employees? What benefit will they derive from knowing whether their employees are performing well or their performance is substandard? The first one is that performance appraisal is conducted to review the performance of employees. And this is an avenue for supervisors, management, and managers of institutions to peruse the day-to-day activities of their workforce and verify whether they are delivering according to expectations. And closely akin to the first bullet is that performance appraisal also help us to judge whether there is a gap between the actual performance of employees and the desired standard. Anytime we want to verify whether there is a gap between the actual performance of employees and desired standard, then we can conduct performance appraisal. Okay, so the actual performance of an employee denotes their conduct at the workplace, how assiduously they are working towards the attainment of a particular set objective, and how they are actually able to attain it. Now, the desired performance is the standards or the objectives which are set for each employee at the beginning of the performance calendar. Okay, so there is the need for us to find if there is a gap between the actual and the desired performance, which is the standard, so that we can remedy the situation, particularly if the trajectory of the individual in question's performance is not suitable. Okay. Now, the third one is to also give employees feedback. The reason why it is important to give feedback to employees is that, like we say in our local parlance, the ultra names and a. Now, performance appraisal outcomes can be an effective way of communicating back to employees for them to know their strengths and their weaknesses. And that can be an avenue to discuss how best they can improve upon their current performance, particularly if there were a lot of deficiencies or deficits identified in a performance review period. So that can be a way of communicating back to employees. And it can also be a way of communicating back to management, because the appraisal process serves as an avenue to roll out the control function of management. We are all aware that management are expected to perform they achieve four main objectives, which include planning, organizing, leading, and the fourth one is controlling. So when we say performance management is a control mechanism for management to execute their fourth objective, it essentially means that it helps management to verify whether, looking at the trajectory of employees, their actual performance is deviating from the set standard. So that if there is a deviation, then management can step in with other plausible interventions, which may take the form of training or a development intervention. It may also take the form of introducing some useful work resources that can be tapped into by employees to improve upon whatever challenges they were hitherto having. The control mechanism could also be an avenue for management to incentivize key players that are excelling or distancing themselves as far as their performance is concerned. Then it can also be used to diagnose training and development needs of the future. In current dispensation and rollouts of performance appraisal systems, it is required that as employees diagnose how they have fared in a given calendar year, they are also supposed to prefer some avenues or interventions that they think, when they are introduced onto, it will help them excel in the next calendar year coming. And so when some of these informations are supplied through the performance appraiser, it can be used as an avenue for organizing some form of training, or if you like, seminars to help improve upon the performance of employees. It is also possible that the outcome of the appraisal will diagnose that the employees are faring well in certain respects in their dealings or their activities, but they are struggling in some other aspects. So the aspects where they are struggling, it can be used as a need for the employees, and this need will become part and parcel of a training intervention that can be organized to address such needs. So that is how it can assist in diagnosing training needs for the future. Then it also assists the human resource department in embarking on decisions such as salary increments, promotions, disciplinary actions, bonuses, and transfer. So that one is quite straightforward. And it can also be used as an avenue to validate selection techniques. So if the recruitment and selection exercise has always used a particular strategy, maybe only interviews, but no inclusion of aptitude tests or work sample tests, and it is giving us desired results, then we may end up concluding that the strategy that we have been using in selecting our employees is actually appropriate. And that is why maybe the outcome of the appraisal for our workforce is always soaring higher. In the same vein, if a category of employees right after, maybe after a year of their inception into the organization, their appraisal records suggest that they are not performing up to what we expect them to do, then we may have to probe the strategies or the selection techniques that we adopted when they were on the verge of joining the company, so that if there is a need for us to introduce a more sophisticated way of scrutinizing them before they are hired, then we will adapt our selection technique. So that is how it can also be used in that regard. Now, any questions so far? Okay, let's make progress. Characteristics of an effective performance appraiser. What are the basis or justifications that we can use to conclude that the appraisal system which is being run or manned by an organization is an effective one? In fact, there are a number of them, but because of time and management of space, in order not to cloud your imaginations when you are reading, I have just selected a few of them, but when you are reading, I'm sure you come across other equally relevant ones which you can use to augment what you'll be seeing now. So the first one is that the philosophy, purpose, and objectives of the organizations must be clearly stated so that performance appraisal tools can be designed to reflect these ones. So the philosophy or the main reason why the organization is in place, what the organization stands for, what it strives to achieve, must be properly articulated. And this articulation will also inform the HR department to pick the appropriate appraisal tool that can be either adapted or adopted from existing ones to help manage the employees towards the attainment of set objectives. Now, the purpose of the appraisal. So here we are moving away from the corporate objectives to the appraisal itself. The purpose of the appraisal must be identified, properly communicated, and understood by all that matter in the organization. And when I say all that matter, everyone that plays a role in an attempt to attain enviable success for a company. So whether you are a security man, you are a cleaner, you are the CEO, because you play some important role in one way or the other, the performance appraisal's objective must be, first of all, clearly stated and communicated for everyone to understand. The reason why it must be properly communicated for everyone to understand it is that when employees have some suspicion that the appraisal is going to be used as an avenue to punish them, then they may also not be compliant. In other words, they may not, they may resist the appraisal process, and that can have negative repercussions, not only for the individuals or employees in question, but for their department or unit where they are also functioning. So it has to be communicated and designed in such a way that it will be understood by everyone that matters in the company. Now, the description, the job description must also be written in such a way that the standards of performance can be identified for each job. So, as an employee of an organization, you must know your core duties or responsibilities, how you are expected to execute them, and how you will know whether you are delivering them diligently or not. Now, this particular information should also not be shrouded in secrecy. So as it is made available to your supervisor or the manager, it must equally be made available to the employee so that it will also inform their initiatives as they strive to achieve or to work harder in the department. Now, it is important for it to be done for each job because when the appraiser or the supervisor decides to rate each employee, they are expected to do it objectively. And the objectivity will come from the standards of the performance, which are usually derived from the job description. So when the standards are missing, then it will compel the rater or the appraiser. So in this question, your supervisor or the co-worker who is conducting the appraisal to rely on their own subjective, if you like, idiosyncrasies. And that may end up producing a lot of rating biases. So the standards or the objectivity must be adhered. The appraisal tools used must also be suited to the purpose for which it will be utilized. And it's also supposed to be accompanied by clear and unequivocal instructions. So the appraisal tool. When an appraisal tool is designed, for instance, to assess the conduct of a driver, it is expected that this appraisal tool will not be used to assess the conduct of, let's say, a security man, because we are talking about two different job categories altogether, and the expectations of the security man will not be the same as that of a driver of a company. So this goes back to the job descriptions. The job descriptions will also inform the kind of standards that are set for each job category, and it will also inform the kind of questions that are included or excluded in the appraisal system. The other way you can identify that an appraisal system is effective is that the evaluators who are expected to appraise the employees. So in this case, either the manager or the supervisor or whoever is in charge of the appraisal system must be trained to use the appraisal tool. So you will not be able to do a good job if you yourself, you don't understand how to carry out the appraisal tool. So this implies that anytime an appraisal system is being introduced, the targeted individuals who are expected to roll this appraisal system out must be properly informed through some form of training or orientation, so that if they become comfortable in the administration of the appraisal tool, then they wouldn't have any reservations when the time becomes right for them to administer it. And this is particularly important because in this current day and age, most appraisal systems are administered through the use or application of some form of technology. So if, let's say, the evaluator is only familiar with the paper pencil one, and the transitioning has made such a person redundant, then in order not to ridicule themselves when it comes to the use of this new technology or computer to conduct the appraisal system, they are even likely to boycott it in the first place. Some companies are sometimes more than 5 years, then there will be no appraiser. But when someone is ripe for a promotion, then miraculously, all of a sudden, they will just cook something out for the person to present, which is not good as far as best practice is concerned. The performance appraisal procedure should also be delineated, communicated, and understood. So when we say the procedure should be delineated, it means that the various stages that are involved in the appraisal process must be properly outlined. So that is the delineation. And this outline must also be communicated to the level of understanding of the stakeholders that are involved. It is important for the procedure to be properly communicated so that when at some point in time employees are called upon for follow-up and as an appraisal interview, they will understand that it is part of the whole process and they are not being singled out, and I say they are not being targeted for any parochial gains. So lastly, the performance appraisal has full support of top management and all who participate in it because they are considered to be fair and productive. So in order to get the compliance of management and all those that matter, it is expected that it will be communicated to their level of understanding, and thereafter you will be able to gain their support, particularly if they have been involved right from day one through communication. It will prepare their mind towards the intention behind the appraisal system. And once you involve them from the outset, you are also guaranteed that you'll be able to gain their support, particularly if all the biases have been clarified and dealt with. Resistance to performance appraisal. Despite the benefits that employees themselves, their supervisors, the department where they belong, and an organization as a body stands to gain whenever they conduct performance appraisal, research suggests that the cardinal key stakeholders that play a role in the success or failure of an organization may sometimes decide to boycott or resist to the appraisal process. So we are going to learn about some of the reasons that may account for some of these stakeholders resisting to the performance appraisal exercise. So we are going to take the stakeholders one by one. The supervisors. So in most organizational jurisdictions, it is the duty of the supervisor to conduct the performance appraisal exercise for the employees that are under his or her umbrella. So on what basis will a supervisor say that he is going to resist the performance appraisal process? The first reason is that, one, the performance appraisal that might have been instituted may demand too much of the supervisor's efforts in terms of time, paperwork, and periodic observation of subordinates' performance. Maybe the nature of the job of the supervisor is such that he is constantly in a he's like a bird in flight, constantly engaged in one activity or the other, which may be equally important. And considering the quantum of time and energy or paperwork that they may have to spend to conduct the appraisal exercise for all the employees under their dispensation, it may not make rational sense for them to bring the level of productivity to a halt for this appraisal system to be administered, which means that the sophisticated nature of an appraisal system has to be considered whenever you are adopting one for your organization. You don't have to adopt a system which is very much rudimentary, or if you like, time consuming. So this day and age, there are a lot of ways that you can use innovation or technology to administer it without necessarily interfering with the work proceedings of an individual in an organization. Supervisors may also not fully understand the purpose and procedure of performance appraisal. This means that maybe when the HR department were adopting or adapting the performance appraisal system, they didn't engage in thorough consultation of the stakeholders, such as the supervisors who will be administering it. And so it comes to them as a surprise with little or no understanding. So gaining compliance on them in terms of administration may also be of a challenge. Then thirdly, supervisors may also lack skills in the appraisal technique. Now, so when the supervisor himself does not understand how to implement such an appraisal system or technique, and they do not even understand how to measure that of their subordinates, it means that they will not want to go there and ridicule themselves or be asked questions that they may not be able to clarify. So the lack of skills may also make them resist, which means that before you roll it out, given the cardinal role that supervisors play in any performance appraisal system, it is imperative that they are also properly inducted to understand how it is supposed to be implemented. Now, employees. So employees are the receiving end. They are the ones that are going to be assessed. What are some of the reasons that account for their resistance to an appraisal system? The first one is that of evaluator bias or rating errors. So evaluators, who may usually be your co-workers or your supervisors or maybe customers that you are serving, are humans, and so they are fallible to mistakes. This aspect of fallibilism means that in an attempt to assess an employee, the likelihood of they being biased or committing some errors, and for that matter, not projecting a true reflection of an employee in question, is high. And this is particularly true in social situations or working environments where there is a lot of friction between a given employee and their supervisor, or a given employee and their co-workers. So when there is little amount of trust in the system, then the tendency for some of these suspicions to fuel the perception of employee that their evaluator is likely to be biased may compel them to also resist the appraisal process. Secondly, when there is lack of clear standard of performance, so just as it applies to the supervisors, when the employees do also not understand the objective behind it, this may fuel some level of suspicions, and for that matter, it may result in a resistance in their behalf. Then when it is not also properly communicated, so the communication is key. The HR, through the supervisors of the various departments, must unequivocally communicate the purpose and objective of the appraisal process. Now, when the communication is tailored to resonate that the appraisal is a feedback system to management and the employees themselves for them to become better than what they currently are, then it will achieve some level of compliance. But if the purpose behind it is shrouded in secrecy and the work environment is also fraught with a lot of suspicions, then you are likely to get some of the employees resisting it. And when there is lack of suitable appraisal too. Now, issues in appraisal or evaluation. So when we are conducting performance appraisal, what are some of the issues that may crop up? And how do we navigate or manage these issues in order to forge ahead? The first issue, which is an ongoing debate in literature and also in practice, is who is more suitable to conduct the appraisal? Who is more suitable? In the past, the suitability of the evaluator was relegated to the supervisor of the employees. And this was so because the supervisor was characterized as all-knowing and knowledgeable about the expectations of the subordinates. And so it wasn't surprising that they were given the task to conduct the appraisal. It has, however, been realized that beyond the supervisor, other people also have the potential and capacity to also execute the appraisal system successfully when they are given some form of training. In the same vein, supervisors have also been noted that they may share few hours with their employees, and the concentration, because they are sharing few hours with them, their concentration will be on the performance outcome of the employee, which is the results, but they may not be privy to the behavior which leads to the attainment of these results. So the day-to-day, hour-by-hour behavioral demonstrations of the employees may not be readily available to them. And most employees, and as humans as they are, may also behave differently when they verify that they are in front of their supervisors. So they may be putting up a good posture or behavior in front of their supervisors, but as the supervisor leaves, then they also start putting up their true character. So to make room for all these things, other stakeholders that engage directly with employees in terms of their interaction and intercommunication, such as peers, customers, and maybe subordinates, have now been also characterized as equally important avenue that can be used to evaluate the performance outcomes of employees. And it is important that these key stakeholders' verdicts are also subscribed, because research contends that they are able to provide information which the manager, who hitherto was the main assessor, was only aware of. They are likely to bring on board additional information which the manager may not have. So what are the conditions necessary for peer appraisal? In my previous slide, I indicated that other key stakeholders, such as peers and our co-workers, can equally supply information to augment the performance for us to characterize the actual performance of an employee in a given calendar year. And before this can be conducted, certain conditions must be put in place. What are some of these conditions? It includes, one, there must be high level of interpersonal trust among the peers. So that is why I explained earlier on that when the working environment is characterized by a lot of suspicions and backbiting, then no one will be trusting each other, because the anticipation is that since you are not in the good books of your peers, they are not going to give you objective and favorable appraisal ratings. The second one is that there should not be a competitive reward at stake. And that is to say, the success of one employee in question should not depend on the failure of the other employee. So if we are all competing for the same reward, then I might as well give everyone bad ratings so that I will emerge as the most hardworking candidates to pick up the reward for myself. So there shouldn't be a competitive reward at stake. In that regard, everyone will be inclined to objectively rate the performance of their peer or co-worker. Then there must also be high level of organizational commitment. And when employees have this high level of organizational commitment with their emotions and cognitions properly aligned with the best interests of the company, then they will also be inclined to objectively give feedback to their co-workers or their peers in terms of telling them where they went wrong and where they got it right. People should also have information about the effectiveness of their peers. In other words, if you are not privy to the behavior and the performance outcome of a co-worker, then you will not be in a good position to rate the success or failure on a job. So you must be privy to information, their day-to-day activities in the organization. Now, self-evaluation. Self-evaluation. And that's a self-appraisal. So oftentimes, people are asked to do self-evaluation. And in this current dispensation of performance appraisal, there is actually a technique that gives room for employees to also appraise how well or how bad they have fared in a given calendar year. The general trend is that when individuals are given the opportunity to appraise themselves, they may tend to inflate their potential and answer their success, which makes the appraisal system unreliable. So this can be done in a situation to attain reliability only if people are objective. So in order for us to take self-evaluation much serious, it is expected that the individuals are supposed to be much objective in projecting their performance outcomes. But it is easier said than done, because if you give everyone the opportunity to appraise themselves, they are more or less likely to exaggerate their potential. So to manage some of these things in settings where we use self-appraisal, what we do is that at the beginning of the performance calendar, you will require the individuals to also set their own performance objectives or standards, so that when they are given the opportunity to appraise themselves and you are verifying whether they've been candid or not, you can be juxtaposing the objectives that they themselves set from the beginning of the year to their actual achievements throughout the year. So let me give a typical example. When lecturers are given the opportunity to conduct self-evaluation. This is managed by one, every lecturer is expected to set their own targets for the year. So for a typical lecturer, it's expected that within a particular calendar year, they will engage in certain number of hours of teaching. Secondly, they will also engage in some form of community services. Thirdly, they are also expected to engage in publications. Now, when the lecturer is asked to use self-evaluation to verify how well they have fared within the calendar year, and we pick a particular parameter and a particular objective, such as number of publications in the year, assuming the lecturer indicated that he is going to publish 2 papers in a year, and you know very well that you have not been able to publish 2, then you can't lie, because when you say you have been able to achieve that target, you are supposed to produce the articles that you think you produced. And this article is also verifiable because it will be online, and it will also be, you can print it out and submit it when you are sending your final evaluations to your supervisor. The community services too, maybe you might have publicized it, and I said there may be some records that you can use to trace it. So all these things are verifiable. And when self-evaluation is managed in this regard, we are able to reduce the amount of inflation or exaggeration that individuals can bring on board in order to manage the impressions, the good impressions that we get out of them. Customers and their role in evaluation. So customers are also used in evaluation, especially if the organization provides services such as insurance, banking, hotels. So in academic circles, because students are the customers of the university, they also provide evaluation about the well-being of the lecturers, as well as the department where they are also found. So that is a way information from customers may become useful to the evaluation process. Now, the input of the customers is important, particularly because they are the consumers of the organizational goods and services. So the input of students in GCTU are considered as very much important because it will help the university, particularly the lecturers in question, to also know how they can improve upon their delivery in the next coming years. And that is why some of this information are almost always solicited. Now, we are going to look at the methods of performance appraisal. The methods of performance appraisal. Essentially, this denotes the various procedures or strategies that can be used to assess the success or failure of an individual on the job. Generally speaking, the methods can be categorized into 2 main respects. We have the traditional methods and the modern methods. The traditional methods and the modern methods. The demarcation between traditional and modern methods partly stems from the degree of involvement of the appraisee, and I said the employee in the appraisal process. So the traditional methods usually is driven or administered by the supervisors or the raters, and I say evaluators. But the modern methods provide room for the appraisees, and I say the employees, to also be involved in the appraisal process. When I say they become involved in it, it means that there are sessions and opportunities that are created for them to also have an input or a say in how, in terms of setting even the standards and also how the appraisal process is actually administered. So the traditional ones include the graphic or linear rating scale, paired comparisons, false distribution method, checklist, estimated ranking, and so on and so forth. And at this level, the modern ones that I'll be introducing you to include the one, management by objectives, behaviorally anchored rating scale, popularly known as BAS, and the 360-degree feedback system. Okay, so let's take them one by one. And I will entreat you to pay keen attention to my explanation, because some of these things will be featured in the multiple choice questions that you will be answering. So if you get the understanding right now, then you are good to go. But if you don't get the understanding, sometimes depending on the example that will be featured in the question, you may have difficulty knowing which appraisal technique is being described and so on and so forth. So please pay keen attention. So the first one that we are going to consider is the graphic or linear rating scale. The graphic or linear rating scale. So the graphic or linear rating scale is an appraisal technique which strives to list a number of attributes or traits of the employees and a range of performance for each of those traits. So a number of attributes of the employees are listed. And each of these attributes or employee characteristics which are listed is linked to a particular performance outcome. Now, right after listing these performance attributes, then the attribute is followed up with a rating scale. And usually the rating scale comes in a line form. That is why we call it linear rating scale. So essentially, the graphic or linear rating scale is a type of appraisal technique in which every trait or attributes of the employee that contributes to their performance is measured in conjunction with a given scale. The employee is then rated by identifying the scores that best describe his or her performance on each trait. So if you pick each attribute in conjunction with the performance, then you will rate them whether you strongly agree that it is a true reflection of their performance or it is not a true reflection. And this includes employees' characteristics and contribution to the job. So let's look at an example. Can you still see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Good.
Yes, sir.
Let's assume we are trying to, the attributes or traits of employee which contributes to their final performance include 1, attitude, 2, decisiveness. So what is the attitude of the employee towards the general work environment? Now, if you think the employee in question has no interest in the work, then it means that you have to circle 0. But if you think maybe the employee in question that we are trying to reach is interested in the work, which means that he accepts opinions and advice of others, then you are expected to circle 10. In the same vein, if you think the attitude of the employee towards the work is the one which is characterized by a lot of enthusiasm and opinion or advice, then you are expected to circle what? 20. In the same wavelength, an attribute or trait like decisiveness, if we are using it as a basis of assessing the performance of the employee. So in situations where we think the employee in question is slow to take decisions, then it means the person is more or less indecisive. So 0 will suffice. Conversely, if we believe that the person takes decision without consultation when it comes to a trait like decisiveness, then we have to circle 0. So anytime a given trait that plays an important role in the final performance of an employee is rated using a linear or a line scale, then we are talking about the graphic or linear rating scale. It is called graphic because whatever ratings you are doing, you can visualize it in a graphic form, like what we have on the screen now. And it is also called linear rating scale because each performance attribute is accompanied by a line scale and also a linear scale. And this may take the form of a Likert scale and what have you. So that is a graphic or linear rating scale. The second one is paired comparison. Paired comparison. Paired comparison means what? At any point in time, you are comparing two people in the organization. You are comparing two people in the organization. This is commonly used in organizational settings where the workforce executes comparatively similar tasks. And the standards that are also expected to be attained by the workforce must also be what? Similar. And it is easier to manage in working environments where you do not have multitudes, you do not have huge number of people under your dispensation. The pair comparison method cardinally compares each employee and their job with other employees and their job. Now, so for you to carry it out, it means that you must first of all appraise and attain the overall performance of each employee. And in order to know how well one is doing in comparison to the other, then you'll be doing the comparisons in pairs. So if you take a sober look at the figure I have on the board, okay, so I have 3 main employees, Kofi, Ama, and Kojo. Kofi, Ama, and Kojo. Now, in order to appraise them, what I need to do
So I think your mic has been muted.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
But
Okay.
say you went off.
Ah, that was when?
No, you muted your mic.
Yes.
Okay, so some of you have your microphones on, just turn it off. Third comparison. Let me quickly scribble some things here. Okay. Let's assume when we use the various parameters to assess Kofi. Kofi scored 7. Okay. Kofi got, hey, and my pen. So Kofi got 7. Ama got 6. And Kojo got 9 out of 10. Assuming when we did it for them individual, this is what we got. Now, we also want to make sense how well, whether Kofi is better than Ama or whether in terms of overall, Kojo is better than Ama. So if you want to do it on pair by pair basis, then the pair comparison may be a good method, even though it may be time consuming. So what will happen is that you will do their recordings and you will, in this matrix, you will place them side by side. So you first of all list them, depending on the number of employees you have, then you also list them up here to get your 3 by 3 matrix. And because we are comparing Kofi to Kofi, here it will be blank. But now we are comparing Kofi to Ama. Let's look at their scores. Kofi and Ama, who got a higher score? Kofi got, yes, so Kofi got 7. For that reason, we will say Kofi is better than Ama. That is why we have plus here. Now, Kofi and Kojo, who got a higher score?
Kojo.
Good. So Kofi compared to Kojo, Kojo is rather better. So Kofi will get a minus here. Let's come to Ama and compare their scores. Ama and Kofi, who got higher?
Ama.
Hey, checking you. Ama and Kofi, who got higher scores?
Kofi.
So for that reason, Ama will get a negative score here because Ama is, in terms of their performance, Ama is inferior to Kofi. Then Ama to Ama, so it's the same person we are comparing. Here will be blank. Kojo and Ama, who got a higher score?
Kojo.
So Ama will get a minus over here because Kojo's performance was superior to that of Ama. Now, Kofi, Kojo, and Ama, we are interested in Kojo over here. Let's compare their scores. Who got higher?
Kojo.
Now, Kojo and Ama, who got higher?
Kojo.
Good. That is why Kojo got plus over here. So when the outcome of this pair comparison will mean that if you pick Kofi and Ama, Kofi is superior. But if you pick Kofi and Kojo, Kojo is superior. If you pick Kojo and Ama, Kojo is superior. And if you pick, Kojo and Kofi, Kojo is superior. Kojo and Ama. And this may be quite time consuming and cumbersome if you have a larger workforce that you want to be comparing on that pair by pair basis. But the advantage of this one is that you can further on zero in to understand why Kofi emerged as much superior in terms of performance over Ama, but less superior to Kojo. Maybe there are some facets that Kojo is not doing well, but Kofi is not doing well, but Kojo was able to overcome. And that becomes a need that you can use to improve the performance of Kofi. The same can be done for Ama. So this one is able to help you to know their specific strengths and weaknesses, particularly if you are looking for, you are using replacement charts or a succession plan of who can succeed what at what point in time. So that is the pair comparison. Then the third one is what we call forced distribution method. False distribution method. So a major criticism that has been leveled against the graphic or linear rating scale is that it is able to give you some numbers, but how are we able to make interpretation of the numbers that we are generating? It is able to tell you that maybe when it comes to decisiveness, the employee got the employee got 10 out of 20. When it comes to attention to detail as a trait, the employee is given a particular score. But how are we able to make sense of all these numbers we are getting? Particularly if you are in a department that wants you to not only convince them with numbers, but with some visuals to help them put the numbers into their right perspective. Then the false distribution becomes imperative. So what happens in false distribution is that the information that is generated through graphic or linear rating scale is now plotted in what we call the Cartesian plane. Do you know the Cartesian plane? Do you know the Cartesian plane?
Yes, sir.
So once you plot it into the Cartesian plane, you will be able to.
Sir.
So you'll be able to understand who is performing superior and who is performing inferior and all that. So Cartesian plane simply means that
The X and Y axis on the graph.
You plot it on a normal. You use a normal distribution curve to plot your numbers, and these numbers will give you some visual appreciation of the general performance of the individuals as well as their totality. Now, sometimes overdrawn na ABN and I'm baby, which means generally their performance is below standard. Ebi also drawn IBBC. No. So this will help you to know the trajectory in terms of your employees' performance. That is the false distribution. So you are essentially forcing your ratings into the Cartesian plane distribution for you to virtually get an impression of what you are getting in terms of the numbers. Into those that are mathematically inclined, they go further after the graphical linear rating scale to also add some of these pictorial aids to make sense of what is happening in terms of the performance. Now, checklist method. Checklist method. This is also one of the easiest and fastest way of conducting performance appraisal. Now, what happens with the checklist method is that the rater is given a checklist. So checklist, a typical example is this one. This may be the checklist. And this checklist will contain descriptions of the behavior and the employees that they are supposed to look at. So let's assume in a particular checklist, some of the aspects of behavior that we are interested in include decisiveness, attention to details, punctuality, communication skills, arithmetic skills. Your friend is simple. Adherence to time and standards, and so on and so forth. So if you pick the checklist and you are evaluating a particular employee, if the given attributes is applicable to the individual in question, then you just check it like this. You check it. If it is not applicable, then you do. So let me pull my pen. So if it is applicable, then you check it. If it is not applicable, then you cross it like that, minus times. The ones that are applicable in terms of the attribute, then you'll be checking it. So whenever we pick it, then we will know that given the individual in question that we are trying to appraise, there are certain behavioral facets that are applicable and others that are not applicable. So that is a checklist method. It is very, very easy to administer. But the challenge with it is that it does not provide rich details or nuances for you to understand the individuals you are appraising. And so when you want to maybe institute some corrective interventions to address the aspects of the employees where they were not checked, it will be difficult to attain it. Then we have the essay method. The essay method, as the name suggests, the essay method also requires the evaluator to write an essay. In fact, in rich details with some specific examples cited to justify the areas of the employee which is being characterized or construed as their strengths and their weaknesses. So essentially, as an evaluator, when we say you are using the essay method, you are going to write a detailed essay about the conduct and the performance of the employee in question. And in the course of writing this essay, you are supposed to pay attention to aspects of the employee which you believe constitutes their strengths and aspects that constitute their weaknesses. And in your description, it is expected that you will intersperse your narratives or your narration with clear and unambiguous examples. So you are supposed to be citing specific incidents that you witnessed. So because it is more or less like an essay and a narration, it tends to be very much subjective, because the way I will write my essay will be totally different from how another colleague or co-worker and another supervisor in a different department may also write an essay. So you may end up having two or more evaluators appraising the same employee, but coming out with different content, because there is more, it allows more room for the subjectivity of the evaluator to come to bear. And for that reason, it is also fraught with a challenge where it provides room for the biases of the supervisor, or if you like, the evaluator, to the biases of the evaluator or the supervisor may also end up characterizing the outcome of the appraisal. And the evaluator have their own biases. So if they are not very much articulate or coherent in terms of their writing, then they may end up not supplying rich, detailed information about your performance well-being. And if you get someone who also is very good and articulate in terms of their writing, then they will produce voluminous essays about their workforce. And when the time is right for us to make sense of the essay, reading and getting the salient aspect of it may become challenging. So that is the essay method. This means that if the supervisor is the type that has challenges in writing an answer in reading and writing, then this method may not be may not be appropriate for them to use, because on I want to mean so they may end up not actually writing something that reflects you. The ranking method. So the ranking method is also construed as one of the oldest and simplest techniques of performance appraisal. It is actually a build-up of the graphic or linear rating scale. So unlike the graphic or linear rating scale, which just leaves the outcome of the rating as it is, the ranking method tries to bring some level of interpretation to the figures that one is gaining, so that it is able to compare the entire performance results that are obtained through the ratings, and it is able to organize them in order of hierarchy and order of relevance. And what I mean by order of relevance is that those that are obtaining higher scores will be placed at the higher pedestal, and those that are scoring low will be found at the bottom of the rank. So essentially, the ranking way is more or less like a stratification system that helps us to make sense of the numbers we are generating for each appraisee. And the ranking method will help us to know who emerged as the topmost performer and who is struggling at the bottom. Critical incidence method. Critical incidence method. So the critical incidence method of performance appraisal tries to ascertain the performance outcome of employees or ratees by emphasizing or measuring on critical events which ensued within a given performance calendar year. So if you pick a particular calendar year, and we say we are using the critical incident method, it means that we are going to concentrate on peculiar incidents which occurred during the year and how the employees in question fared during the execution of such incidents. So a typical example, a critical incident in a given organization, and I say in a particular calendar year, may be the outbreak of COVID-19 and how individuals were able to adhere to the COVID protocols and also manage it to prevent the spread of the malice. Now, this is a critical incident. And so when we want to understand how employees fared under such circumstances, then we can use this method. But it is often used in conjunction with other appraisal methods, such as graphic or linear rating scale. So that whereas the graphic or linear rating scale will be focusing on the other aspects of the employee's performance, which are not peculiar to incidents occurring out of the blue, the critical incident will also be focusing on the positives and negatives outcomes of employees during the occurrence of a particular critical event. Now, a major drawback of this method is that it may not adequately supply us with information which ensued during the critical moments in time. And this is true because the supervisor who is usually contracted to conduct or administer the performance appraisal is not God, and so will not be everywhere to monitor and become privy to all the critical events. And so anytime they miss a cardinal event, they may not be able to supply it as a positive or a negative to an employee in question. So we are done with the traditional ones. We are now transitioning onto the modern appraisal methods. The first one that we are going to consider is what we call behaviorally anchored rating scale. Behaviorally anchored rating scale. And I say behavioral anchor rating scale. And the acronym for it is BAS. Now, because of the reservations and remarks that the criticism that people were advancing to the traditional ones, that it delineates the appraisee or the employee from the appraisal process, behaviorally anchored rating scale was introduced to remedy some of those drawbacks. So if you take a sober look at the graphic or linear rating scale, it meant that the supervisor just had to be familiar with the standard that has been set for the employee and compare their actual performance on the basis of some specific attributes or traits that are desired to the performance of a given job or a given job. Now, so whether you are present there or absent, it is not required. Again, it does not also provide room for supervisors to introduce some incidents that they think connotes the strengths of or the weakness of the employee in terms of articulating or narrating them as part of the appraisal process. So the BAS ensures that just as the graphic or linear rating skills, there are predetermined critical areas for job performance, and these are set ahead of time, and it is made known to the employee in question. In some respects, the employee is even given the opportunity to peruse some of the statements to see whether it is actually a reflection of what they engage in as far as their day-to-day activities is concerned. Now, once a consensus is derived, then it is expected that each behavioral attribute is anchored with a rating scale, just as it ensues in the use of graphic or linear rating scale. And the evaluator is expected to assess the competence of the employee in question on the basis of the parameters and explanations and the scale that accompanies the performance facet. Inti ufa an attribute like readiness for training. Readiness for training. When we say we are using that as one of the traits to judge the performance of an individual on the job, as far as the behavioral part is concerned, then this is how BAS will project it. So these are the skill or the basis on which you are going to appraise the individual in question as far as their readiness for training is concerned. And these are the interpretations of each score or points on the scale. So whereas the 7 is extremely good, then 1 is extremely poor. And this is a typical example of what we call a Likert scale, because you do not have opposite ends. I would say there are other skills you have strongly agree and strongly disagree. Agreement can be a scale on its own, and disagreement can also be a scale on its own. So when a scale does not have opposites ends, then we call it a Likert scale. And these are the explanations for each score that you'll be selecting on the scale. So if you are awarding 7 for an employee that you think is very much ready for training, then this is the interpretation. That means that, generally speaking, the employee in question can expect you expect the trainee to make valuable suggestions for increased sales and to have positive relationship with customers all over the country. So this particular scale in question is actually trying to ascertain the performance of the employee. The performance of the employee. If you say the performance of the employee is extremely good, then this is the interpretation. If it is extremely poor, then the interpretation is that such an employee can expect to take extended coffee breaks and roam around purposefully. And this is characteristic of what we call presenteeism. So the person is physically present at the work premises, but they are not contributing to organizational success. So coffee break, moving from one place to the other without actually contributing to organizational success. So in addition to these ratings, then an opportunity will also be provided for the evaluator to write an essay citing critical events that justify the strengths and weaknesses of the appraisee. And that is the behaviorally anchored rating scale. The second one is what we call management by objectives. Management by objectives, or MBO. So management by objectives also suggests that management of an organization, together with their supervisors, are not all-knowing. Rather, employees may also have adequate knowledge or information which, when brought forth at the right time, can be harnessed to ensure the success of the company. For this reason, at the beginning of the calendar year, management by objective strategy requires that the supervisor or whoever is going to be the evaluator and appraiser must meet with the employees that are going to be appraised and deliberate on aspects that must become part and parcel of the standards that need to be attained. And the setting of these standards are also done in conjunction with the organization's corporate objectives in mind. And once there is a consensus or agreement, these focal areas that have been agreed upon will now become the standard that will be used in appraising the employees. Now, a major advantage of management by objective is that it is able to ensure compliance of all stakeholders because they were involved from the outset when the performance standards were being set. And it also helps them to cognitively acknowledge what will be expected of them. And this cognition will inform the way they behave when they are in any work situation. And management by objectives, according to research, has 4 main stages. The first stage is where there is a setting of organizational goals. So these are usually designed by people that occupy the strategic level of the company in conjunction with other members of the organization. And once this is agreed, then the performance targets is derived from the goals or the corporate objectives that have been set. And the derivation of these targets are also contingent on the departments and the role that you are performing in that department. So here we are going back to your job description. When we pick your job description, we are expected to connect it vertically to how it will help us attain the organizational goals. We are also expected to connect it horizontally, such that maybe your output will become an input for another department. And I say your output will become a source of inspiration for others within your same department to also have to learn from. Then the third stage is what we call performance review. So the review is where we actually conduct the performance appraisal to see the trajectory, the performance trajectory of the employee. And the feedback is where appraisal, post-appraisal session is held between the evaluator, usually the supervisor, and the employee or appraisee in question, for them to dispassionately as well as objectively discuss what ensued, what the supervisor saw, the strengths, the weaknesses, and the reasoning behind the labels that are being adduced in the appraisal we see. And that will also give the room for the subordinate to also ask follow-up questions, particularly if they think the appraiser has not been objective in the assessment in certain respects. And this back and forth will go for each of them to learn from each other. So that is why we construe it as feedback, because the supervisor will be giving feedback to the appraisee, whereas the employee will also be giving feedback to the supervisor. And through this exercise, proper interventions can be forged out in situations where a lot of deficiencies were identified. And some of these interventions may take the form of introducing additional work resources or some training or development, if you like, education for them to reduce their deficiencies. Whereas maybe the supervisor may be thinking that the employee in question was not able to attain target because they are lazy, the employee will also be providing feedback that they were not able to achieve the target because the resources that they required were also not provided on time. And I say the sophisticated resources that are required for them to deliver superior performance is not available. So all these things will be ironed out. Now, the last modern performance appraisal method that we are going to look at is the 360-degree feedback system, which is also known as the multi-source, multi-rater performance appraisal, and now 360-degree performance appraisal. Now, this appraisal method gets the name 360-degree from the way the appraisal exercise is conducted. So if you look at the diagram I have over here, it is essentially mimicking the Cartesian plane. So this will be the y-axis, this will be the x-axis. And at every quadrant of the Cartesian plane, you will have one rater playing a cardinal role over there. So in this particular instance, we have the supervisor or superior, the peer or co-workers, the subordinates, and self, which means the individual employee in question is also given an opportunity to candidly appraise their performance. Now, the reason why the 360-degree feedback is now gaining much prominence is that it provides an alternative avenue or ratings to that of the superior or the supervisor, so that if the work environment is fraught with a lot of biases, particularly from the unanswered suspicions from maybe the supervisor, then the ratings you'll be getting from other facets, such as your peers, subordinates, self, or customers, is anticipated to cushion the rating errors that will be coming from one facet. Now, the 360-degree feedback is also gaining much grounds because the perspective of ratings that is garnered from these stakeholders are most often than not catered for when you use only the supervisor as an avenue for conducting the performance appraisal. So for instance, in situations where the supervisor does not share the same office with the employee in question, then their day-to-day behavioral mannerisms may not be readily available to the superior, which can be supplemented by the peers or maybe the individual in question themselves. And so as you move from one aspect of the quadrant to the other, you become informed with wealth of information that may not be available from the preceding evaluator or rater. Any questions so far? Okay, now the last aspect that we are going to consider in this lecture is what we call rating errors and our rating biases, which are usually originating from the rater. So some books caption them as rater problems. So as I indicated in my introductory remarks, evaluators or supervisors that conduct performance appraisal are humans, and for that matter, fallible to the commitment of mistakes and errors. And because of this level of fallibilism, it is likely that their inaccurate rating of an individual's performance may also be used to make decisions that will not alter well for the employee in question. So as much as possible, best practice recommends that as raters and our potential raters, we become wary of some of these rating errors so that when we find ourselves in a circle where we are conducting appraisal or some form of rating, then we will be mindful and not commit them. Sometimes we commit some of these errors unconsciously, particularly because of how we have internalized the world of work and our expectations of the world of work. And other times we deliberately commit them. But irrespective of how they are committed or omitted, it is expected that we do away with some of these rating errors in order to profess accurate judgment of employees' performance. The first one is what we call central tendency error. Central tendency error. This error occurs when a rater avoids using high or low ratings and assign average ratings to the employees. So in central tendency error, what we are saying is that the evaluator in question, instead of comparing the actual performance of the employee to the assessed standard to decipher whether they deserve high, moderate, or low rating, they are rather giving everyone average, in order to avoid some level of criticism from your friend is saying, the employees that are being appraised. And that will be a lazy way of conducting performance appraisal, because you will end up not getting use for the information you are generating from assigning these average ratings. In other words, you will end up demoralizing a hardworking employee who was expecting a superior rating or a higher rating. And you also end up incentivizing a lazy worker who did not deserve an average rating but has been assigned average ratings. So whenever the rater believes that all employees are equal and do not want to rock the boat, then they are likely to conduct central tendency error, which is something that you must all aspire to avoid. The second one is what we call leniency error, and leniency effects, or leniency bias. Now, leniency bias is said to have occurred anytime the supervisor, the evaluator, or the rater assigns undeservedly high ratings to the appraisees and other employees. So what happens is that the supervisor wants to avoid people coming into confrontation with him or her. So in order to avoid all these controversies about why you are giving me average or below average, then they decide to give the marks, boom, 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 boom. And when that happens, leniency effect has occurred. This is also something that we must all aspire to avoid, because you will end up not getting any good use for the ratings that you are giving out. In fact, someone who is below average will be getting higher scores, even though they do not deserve. Whereas those that deserve higher ratings will also be placed at that pedestal. And so you will not be able to tell a good performer from a bad one. The opposite of leniency effect is strictness effect. So strictness effect, it simply means that the supervisor or the rater is going beyond the standards that they are even supposed to use for the rating. And they are giving unduly low ratings to the workforce. So, and then I am can say, if like a teacher is marking you and a lecturer is marking your paper, and he's marking it with an iron hands, no matter what you write, the person does not become pleased or satisfied with it. When this occurs, then we say strictness effect has occurred. It essentially means that the individual who is doing the rating is unduly critical. Okay, now contrast effects. Contrast effect, I think I've explained it before. Contrast effects. So contrast effects is said to have occurred whenever another employee's performance influences the ratings that are given to someone else. So usually the first person that is rated, if the outcome is good or bad, then it is used as a yardstick to rate the subsequent ones. So that if the first one got above average performance, and that is now being used as the yardstick, then anyone who follows and does not meet that standard may be construed as what? Below average. Now, the danger with contrast effect is that the evaluator is now moving away from, if you like, his or her marking scheme. And he is now using one of the employees that are supposed to be appraised as the yardstick or the marking scheme to appraise the remaining counterparts. So you may end up coming across other equally interesting performance, but because you are deviating from your marking scheme and you are using another person's marking scheme, you will not get the best out of the ratings. The fifth one is what we call similar to me error. Similar to me error. And let me add at this juncture that I am not making these things up. So we can say, similar to me error there. Say now, what label is that is how we call it. And there is an explanation behind it. Similar to me error is said to have occurred whenever the rater, the supervisor, or the appraiser in question judge employees more favorably on the basis that they have some attributes that are similar or that are shared by the rater or the supervisor in question. So let me use it as myself as an example. If we say I have committed similar to me error, it means that I will be giving favorable ratings in my marking. I'll be giving higher scores to students that maybe share my name. And I said students that I attend the same church with, students that I live in the same neighborhood with, and so on and so forth. The moment I reduce the rating process to characteristics that are shared by myself and the students, instead of the standards that has been set to be used as parameters for appraisal, then I have committed similar to me error. Now, the sixth one, which is also closely akin to similar to me error, is personal characteristics bias. Personal characteristics bias. Now, whenever the appraiser, either consciously or unconsciously, rates the appraisees, that is the employees, either high or low, on the basis of the characteristics of the employees, but not the performance standard, then personal characteristics bias has occurred. This presupposes that the performance of the job is not contingent on these personal characteristics, such as religiosity, race, gender, age, and other factors. But the supervisor in question is trying to reduce the appraisal process to these factors, these personal characteristics, instead of the standards that he is supposed to concentrate on to verify the performance outcome of the employees. The seventh one is what we call recency effects, and it comes from the word recent. Recency effects originates from the word recent. Now, recency effects is an error and a bias which occurs whenever a rater overemphasizes an employee's most recent behavior. Performance appraisal is supposed to be done on the conduct or performance of an employee throughout the year. It is not supposed to be on the events or the activities which occurred prior to the conduct, which immediately occurred prior to the conduct of the performance appraisal. Now, the moment the supervisor concentrates on only recent events and use that to reflect the performance of the employee for the whole year, then recency effect has occurred, because the supervisor will not be portraying a true reflection of the employee's competence in that given calendar year. This usually occurs in social situations where the rater and a supervisor in question was not available at some point in time, and they are only privy to the recent events or behavior of the employee. And so in other instances too, because of fallibility of memory and a loss of information in their mind's eye, they may not be able to remember some of the things that were documented on the employee from the beginning of the year. And so they will base their appraisal outcomes on only recent events. And when that occurs, recency effect has occurred. The opposite of recency effect is what we call primacy effect. Primacy effect. So unlike in recency effect where the supervisor is fixated by recent events, in primacy effect, the supervisor is fixated or overemphasized on past events. And when I say past, the earliest events. So if you pick the whole calendar year, primacy effects will occur if we use only, let's say, January and February behavior and outcomes of an employee to reflect their performance for the whole year, instead of considering other aspects of the employee's performance from March through to December. Is it clear? So it is recommended that when you are conducting appraisal, you take into consideration all the initiatives, gains, challenges that the employee is encountering from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And for you to make good use of the appraisal information, particularly in terms of improving the performance of the employee before the year comes to an end, it is expected that you conduct the appraisal at least once before the year comes to an end. So it is expected that within a given calendar year, you may conduct it after 6 months. And the deficiencies that will be identified at the 6 months, you quickly introduce some interventions to address them before you get to the last month, which is December. When you're able to do this, then you will be improving not only the performance of the individual employee in question, but the organizational performance can also be guaranteed. And when you manage performance appraisal in this systematic and coherent fashion, we say you are conducting what we call performance management system. In other words, it is not only about appraisal and keeping the appraisal information, but right after appraisal, corrective initiatives are introduced to address the deficiencies and answer the weaknesses that were identified. And there may also be some other interventions that may be introduced in the form of bonuses or allowances to incentivize those that are excelling in their performance. So that together will come to form what we call performance appraisal system. Any question? Any question?